Testing. Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad we're so efficient. Getting started at 7. Thank you for being here and welcome to ProPublica Live in conversation with Jason Leopold. I'm thrilled to be here for what I know will be a fascinating and productive discussion. My name is Cynthia Gordy. I'm the Director of Marketing for ProPublica. And for those unfamiliar with ProPublica, we are an independent nonprofit newsroom that produces investigative journalism in the public interest. Our work focuses exclusively on important stories that expose abuse of power and betrayal of public trust by government, business, and other institutions. And we use the moral force of journalism to spur positive change. So I hope you'll check us out at ProPublica.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter at ProPublica.org/newsletter. So in addition to the folks in the room, we also have an online audience. So to those online, thank you for joining us. You can participate in the conversation and ask questions by using the hashtag ProPubLive. That's ProPubLive. And of course, everyone in the room also uses that hashtag. On Twitter, Jason Leopold is at Jason Leopold, and our moderator, Eric Eman, is at Eric Eman. That's Eric, the letter U-M-A-N.
Thank you. Spelling that.
And one request, I just want everyone to please put your phones on mute as we are recording this. So before we get started, I want to thank our event sponsor, and that is the Geraldine R. Foundation. The Dodge Foundation funds art, education, environmental, and media initiatives in New Jersey to promote meaningful change on important issues right here in New Jersey. So a tremendous thank you to the Dodge Foundation for your generous support. And finally, I want to thank my fellow host organizations for tonight, NJ Spark and Rutgers University School of Communication and Information. Thank you for all of the work that made this come together. And with that, next we'll hear from the chair of Rutgers School of Communication and Information, Jack Radish.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm the chair of the Journalism and Media Studies Department. On behalf of that department, I welcome all of you here. It's great to see a turnout like this, especially in a December evening for a lot of students. This is crunch time, and so it's really great to see a number of students as well as other folks out here tonight to hear this important discussion. So I want to thank also Doc Monday. I want to thank ProPublica and also Simon Walker for all of his work in putting this together. So I'll just say briefly that I've been chair since 2012, and what I've seen is an amazing explosion of interest and organizational work around investigative reporting in ways that, until the chair was still there, but even our courses weren't really that vibrant. Our investigative reporting courses, but since then I'll just list a few things that both national and very local. One, obviously, based on things like the Snowden revelations and Greenwald's work with that, plus Jeremy Scable's ongoing work in investigating anti-war documentaries with the emergence of things like the Intercept, happened from things like Vice, right, becoming an organization dedicated to investigation of current affairs, to things that are, and I remember also being I also reading tool goes around the live stream and eventually becoming part of Vice as well. Locally, since 2012, we've had 2 student groups that are dedicated to investigative reporting, Rutgers and Rutgers. So 2 very nice. We've seen a JMS alum, Charlie Preville, here in the back, right, start New Brunswick Today, right, both an online presence and a print version that is bilingual, and also dedicated very much to the concerns of the community of New Brunswick. And then we've also had, under the very capable leadership of my colleague, Dr. Todd Wilson, who's here, the emergence of NJ Spark, a social justice journalism and media lab as well. So these issues range from very global issues around surveillance, war, poverty, labor, migration, to very local ones. And I want to mention one really local project that's happening right now, which is the Really Little Secrets project around small toxic sites in New Jersey. This is a project that is working with NJ Spark and also the Center for Investigative Reporting, Cooperative Media, yes, and the others, right? So work on these sites. And in fact, our spring 2016 investigative reporting class is looking to be dedicated to this project. So we want to do assignments in the class that are linked to it. So if you're a student here, thinking about a class for spring investigative reporting, and also at this point we're still looking for an instructor for the course. We've had a couple of people who have been able to do it. So if you know someone or if you're someone, Jason Leopold? Yeah, yes.
Be bi-coastal, I'll have to come back and forth in LA.
Right.
Only in the springtime.
Yeah. But okay, but I'm running out of my time, both and as chair, and so I'm really looking forward to the increase in interest and projects for investigative reporting. So with that, I will turn it now over to the assignment opportunity to start.
Hi everyone, pleasure to see you all here. I want to thank Jack for helping us out this event. I have been asking him for long started something. And then people came here was kind of going in my lap thanks to Cynthia. Who reached out to us, so without Jack, I know this event can happen, and certainly NJ Spark couldn't exist. And for those who don't know, NJ Spark is a social justice journalism lab at Rutgers University. We're trying to innovate and introduce real-world experiences by bringing them together with media makers and journalists to make media for and about underserved communities. And we have some of them here, so if you want to give them a hand. We're during a very experimental semester and working hard and supporting us through our endeavors to make positive change. Again, I want to thank Cynthia for reaching out to me for an incredible organization and sort of an example of the kind of work that our community purpose is to do ourselves. Coincidentally, the students have been working on freedom of information act requests this semester. So the event and the topic is perfect and in line with our course material. For those who don't know already, Jason Leopold, the gentleman to my left, closest to me, haven't actually had a chance to meet him. But has been allegedly referred to as a Freedom of Information Act terrorist for his use of FOIA in his work. Jason is an Emmy-nominated investigative reporter for Rice News. He covers national security, terrorism, civil liberties, and other issues. His aggressive use of FOIA includes some notable events like successful suits against the FBI and Department of Defense. He's also testified before Congress about problems journalists have faced using the Freedom of Information Act. We're very glad to have him. Who's an assistant managing editor of ProPublica and a member of the Pulitzer Prize winning team. Previously, he wrote a column for Slate and was editor of MojoJones.com and has been published in a few other casually local organizations like New York Times Magazine and Washington Post. We're glad to have Eric here to facilitate the dialogue with Jason, so we're happy to say, let's get started. With you.
Great. So I actually wanted to begin by suggesting that we do this in a little bit of a non-traditional manner, which is that if folks have questions throughout, raise your hand and we can answer the question. You don't even have to leave it. Shout it out appropriately. And I'm curious from the beginning, how many folks here have done work in journalism in some fashion or another? Scott Klein doesn't count. Great, and how many people have filed FOIAs as a part of this? Great, so I thought about that we could start from the very basics, but first I should
the Office of Information Policy, which is part of the Justice Department, they're supposed to make sure that all these agencies are abiding by these guidelines that would, again, as part of Attorney General Robert Holder's guidelines, to make sure that people are getting information that that they're doing their jobs as you know, under the executive order, and they've just failed miserably. So they're not doing a good job. So it hasn't trickled down, you know, into these agencies. And as you can see with, you know, with like Hillary Clinton and the State Department, they're now just completely backlogged with these, you know, with these FOIA requests, because now everyone, including me, is sued for Hillary Clinton's, you know.
Jason is being modest. Jason is the one responsible for better or for worse for the Hillary Clinton emails that folks have been hearing about over the course of the last year. It was a lawsuit that you brought that brought them to light.
Yes, yeah. And that was before the scandal broke. I have another attorney that I work with. His name is Ryan James, and he's amazing.
Getting a discount from your attorneys?
Yeah, by the way, Ryan James, in case, did you know that? No, I mean, these attorneys work really hard. And I mean, I filed it, they do all the, you know, legal work. And this was before the scandal even broke. I mean, we had no idea that she was using a private email account. I just simply wanted to gain access, you know, to her records, because she was going to be the Democratic presidential frontrunner. And as soon as we filed, you know, it was a month or so later, because I knew that we'd have to sue. We sued, and the scandal broke. Then it went into, you know, into court, and the judge forced, you know, issued an order saying, forcing the State Department to release it to us on a rolling basis. And the public benefits, because it's not just to me, it's to everyone.
And you've talked about, I should say, Jason was at ProPublica's offices this afternoon, where we had a very nice lunch and chatted about some of this stuff. So
Eric bought me a great sandwich.
It is true. It's delicious. It doesn't sound
amazing.
But one of the things you talked about is this isn't, you know, something that's just sort of stuck in the bureaucratic bowels or some such, right? That these decisions can go quite high. So in fact, you had the experience of when you essentially FOIA'd your own FOIA, of finding out that one of your FOIAs had gone all the way up to the Secretary of Defense, who had then commented on it and make a decision, which, you know, to be clear, is not how it should happen, because these shouldn't be political decisions.
Right.
These should be decisions based on
Yes.
the facts. So
yeah, it politicizes the process. I mean, there have been many times, in fact, what I found out, and it was through another nonprofit organization that filed a FOIA, and I went off on their heels filing another FOIA, that the Department of Defense specifically has, I forget how they refer to it, but it's essentially all of the FOIA requests that may generate media attention that have to get pre-department approval before anything is released, approval somehow. And so I actually filed a list of what those, you know, I wanted a FOIA, find out what exactly those were. None of mine were on there, and I was very disappointed. But there were others on there that were like, what? This is, you know, some of these things were just crazy. So that right there you can see how it becomes politicized. And the fact that more people are actually using this tool, you know, and not just journalists, by the way, but the public, just members of the public, you know, are using this tool. It puts these agencies into a bind that they really do, you know, fear that this is going to get some, you know, perhaps some negative attention. So it goes up the flagpole. I mean, on the, you know, I can understand on some of the Edward Snowden documents that I've, you know, asked for that it, you know, they're worried about, you know, what kind of attention it will get. So it does go up to, you know, very high up. But again, it politicizes it, and that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Given the fact that you said it was politicized, is there any limitation based on how you get your information, like what you can publish or what you can release to the public, or after it's just a free flow of information on what you receive?
After, you want to ask it?
You want to ask that again? We have to.
We're going to get this for our podcast.
My question was, when you get your information, since you said it was basically it goes to the political ranks, is there a filter that you can release the information of what limitations the press has in order to release the information to the general public, or it's just a free-for-all of information after you get it?
You mean that I could release?
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could release it to anyone I want. I mean, I think that's actually an important note. So everything that I write that has to do, in fact, I have a new story out today on vicenews.com about one of the U.S. citizens who was killed in a drone strike along with Mar-a-Lago. I'm sure everyone's hopefully heard about that. I post these documents, you know, along with the stories. Not everyone does that, you know, not every news organization does that. I know ProPublica does that, but not every news organization does that. And it's just really important, you know, because it does become an important transparency, part of that transparency initiative to ensure that you're sharing this with everyone. Just to give you an example, I was actually mentioning this to Eric on the train, Eric and Scott. I had a lawsuit along with one of my colleagues for documents that the CIA, about the CIA's alleged hacking into the Senate's computers when when the Senate Intelligence Committee was preparing their report on the CIA's torture program. And so there was this big controversy that erupted that the CIA was spying on the Senate, and it really led to a near constitutional crisis. Dianne Feinstein made this extraordinary floor statement, and so I, filed this lawsuit, and with my colleague, and we asked for all the documents behind the scenes. The CIA, about what essentially went on. The CIA turned over documents, and they turned over one document that apparently they shouldn't have. And they asked me not to post this document.
You got a phone call,
I got a phone call. Yes, I got a phone call from the CIA. And it was, this is what they said, yeah, that was a freebie. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, we shouldn't have given you that document, and we don't want you to post it. And I said, okay, I hear you. I was trying to figure out at that point, oh man, what should the lead of my story be? And then after I hung up the phone, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I now know the lead of my story. And it was not a document, by the way, that, it wasn't a document that would have, been a grave threat to national security. This is an example of.
You should say what the document was.
This was an apology letter that CIA Director John Brennan wrote to Dianne Feinstein for spying on the Senate, for hacking into their computers. That's what it was.
They actually have a pre-printed card, right? I'm sorry, I spied on you.
Like whoops. The funny thing is that I didn't even know that this was the document until I spoke to a Senate staffer who informed me that they never received this apology letter. So, so the CIA basically said they didn't want me, they didn't want me to post it, but there was no reason not to, And even if it were something where, it was a mistake and it could have been a national security issue, they probably, they would have had to make a good case. But the point being that it is, at that point, it's mine. I can release it to everyone. One more example is actually with the Department of Health and Human Services. I asked for all these documents related to Ebola. When the Ebola crisis outbreak was happening, there was discussions about drugs. What kind of drugs that they could come up with for dealing with it. And they accidentally disclosed to me information that would have revealed what they say are trade secrets. Basically what that was the name of the company that was providing them with, whatever drug related to Ebola. And so they said, whoops, we didn't redact that. Can you do it? And I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy, No. And I think they got the message, afterwards. So the funny thing, though, is that after I testified before Congress, I started getting these phone calls and emails from various FOIA offices saying, hey, Jason, we saw your testimony for Congress. We just want you to know that we're dealing with your request, and we haven't forgotten about you. And it was like, oh, this is cool.
Does anybody have a question? All right, go ahead.
Quick question. So I kind of lost track of the Feinstein letter. Did you use it or not?
Oh, kidding? We put it up, not only did we use it, we blew it up, and, you know, it was big. The letter was 8 by 10, I think we made it by like 50 by or something. Yes, we used it. We posted it on the story, it became like sort of the centerpiece. I mean, the funny thing is that, you know, it was sort of underscored the whole point that, you know, Feinstein was trying to make about what was happening at this time, and you know, sure enough, this letter sort of proved it. I mean, it's a very lengthy story that's out there. But yes, no, that was, like I said, it really was sort of part of the lead of my story that I was spending weeks on. And yes, it would be very hard to miss.
Thank you. Recently I filed a FOIA request to the FTC, and I received a letter back stating that they could neither confirm nor deny.
Glomar.
And I,
Nice.
there you go.
Congratulations.
So,
It's a badge of honor.
I appreciate
Yes,
that.
yes.
Is it a badge of honor?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would like to know, is this a typical response?
It's interesting.
And how does one address it? And the second set of questions I have to do with, is there fee shifting with attorneys who do FOIA work? In New Jersey, we have fee shifting.
I'm not
Do you
familiar
mean
with
like scales for depending on?
No, under the New Jersey Open Public Records Act, if you file a complaint and you prevail,
Yeah.
the prevailing attorney actually gets fees.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
yes.
is that true? Is that also the case under FOIA?
Yes, it is.
It is,
Yes.
okay.
I mean, normally for that, it's, you know, if the FOIA sort of forced the government to release it, they weren't going to release it anyway. With the Glomar, that's what they call it. Glomar, it's after Glomar, it's after the Glomar destroyer.
A great,
Really great. There's a
a really
great,
great story.
yeah, and there's actually a great Radio Lab.
Yes.
Radio Lab piece on that. I mean, I highly recommend it.
Do you have more information about that?
Can I-
Radio Lab? Or
Yeah.
can we get it
Yes, well, I'll just tell the story briefly,
Yeah.
because it's one of the great stories. A Soviet submarine sunk, and it was an advanced submarine, and the U.S. decided we're going to go get the submarine. And so they launched this crazy thing where I think they tried to pull it up with a pulley or something, and the ship was called the Glomar, right?
Right, yeah.
And someone tried to get information about it, and I think they had this thing of, they were in a sticky wicket. They said, we couldn't deny it, but to acknowledge it would be a really bad idea too. So we're just going to come up with this elegant thing where we say we can neither confirm nor deny, and that got called the Glomar response.
Yeah. And it was the LA Times that actually first brought up that story.
A great radio lab. If you type in Radio Lab in Glomar, it's a hell of a story because it's a crazy way they brought up a sub from the bottom of the ocean, among other things.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a Glomar is, you know, I heard the second badge of honor. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, certainly, you know, I remember when I got my first Glomar, I was like, whoa, Glomar, this is awesome.
They don't, by the way, say it under like Glomar.
Yeah,
I just want to
but what's really interesting about that is that with the Snowden, you know, because after the Snowden leaks, here's, by the way, the NSA is so backlogged, and the reason why is because after the Snowden leaks, they were inundated with requests from people who said, I would like to know if you're spying on me. And no joke, because I actually asked for all these records, and it has it there. It's literally, they got thousands and thousands of requests. I want to know if you're spying on me, give me all those records, you know. And the NSA generally has this sort of, you know, mandatory response, which is we neither confirm nor deny. And so in these documents that I got, I saw that, you know, they were discussing it, and they said, we're just going to have to Glomar. So it's really cool to sort of see them actually use the term. But really, I mean, it's hard to beat a Glomar. It's hard to beat it unless you know that what you're requesting has been discussed publicly. If you can find any information publicly citing whatever it is you're seeking, that you can then appeal and say, this shouldn't, you know, I appeal the decision to, you know, to Glomar this, discussed, here's an article about it, here's some official talking about it in Congress. Try to find as much information you can about it. Even then it may, you still may run up against, problems with dealing with the agency, but that's really your best bet, is actually, trying to find out as much as you can. So again, just to stay on the leaks from Edward Snowden. So all of this information is out there, right? There's been a lot of information that's been published about these programs that he has, that these documents have revealed, the names of these programs. And so just in various publications, and I filed many, many FOIA requests with the NSA just to test the waters to see, whether they have this, whether they would give up their documents about it. And even though this was out there, even though there's public information out there, it wasn't officially released. Yeah. So they're still glomaring it, right? They're still saying they can neither confirm nor deny. But if you can find anything that would be officially released, discussed, that would be your benefit.
Just to follow on with that, because I remember a story that actually Scott and I did together a few years ago, the absurdity of this, that we did a story about the drones, we did a series of stories about the drones program, and what we found was administration officials were talking on background, were essentially bragging all the time about all the terrorists that were being killed by drones, right? And so there were hundreds and hundreds of articles where they're saying, unnamed sources, but administration officials talking about so-and-so being killed and so-and-so other person being killed. And then the ACLU had a suit that said, we want the information about the legal justification for drones. And they said, oh no, we can't do that because we can't acknowledge that there's a drone program. Right? So what we did was we ran an article that literally showed hundreds upon hundreds of White House officials talking about drones, and then the legal filing that says we can't acknowledge the existence of this program.
And that actually goes to, what the question you were asking earlier about transparency of this administration, secrecy. I mean, it's just highly secretive. That's, particularly when it comes to, areas of national security like that. But that's your best bet.
I feel like we've been not giving fairness to this side, so we should.
Wait. Sorry.
That's a lot.
Can I get through? Sorry.
You started off talking in regards to one of the FOIAs that you did and how 3 months later, ... and that it was in the ideal situation. And then you just mentioned the word backlog in regards to this. So we're talking about something that you really should feel passionate about because this is going to be settle in for a long winter's nap type of situation, right? What is the longest that you have waited on action being taken?
I'm still waiting. In fact, I could probably read you an email I got today from the Department of Energy that says, hey, this was 3 years ago I filed this. Hey, Jason, we just got to, you're processing it. Your request, this was for an Inspector General report. Are you still interested in getting it? Yeah. And I'm like, yes, I'm still interested in getting this. Send it to me for crying out loud. I was thinking other words, but that's the word I typed. I mean, there are requests that are 5 years that are still outstanding. I was very surprised with the Department of Homeland Security recently, and I wrote this story recently. The Department of Homeland Security is huge, and they have a huge backlog. In fact, I think that they're the agency that received the most FOIA requests out of all government agencies last year. But I filed a FOIA request with them about the protests in Baltimore related to the death of Freddie Gray. And I filed it, I said I want to, with a couple of divisions within the Department of Homeland Security. Remarkably, they sent me a bunch of documents, 700 pages, within 3 weeks. That was the fastest I ever received a response, the fastest. And there was an amazing story in there because it showed that they were monitoring various Twitter accounts of leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement, and monitoring monitoring them for, sort of information. That was sort of seen as, not a very good thing. They have rules on that. So that was the quickest. The longest, I'm still waiting, NSA, there's, it's been 3 years. I have friends that have been waiting 10 years. But that's crazy. If you're waiting 10 years, that's truly, it's worth investing the money to sue. It depends on how badly you want it. I want everything, and I want it like tomorrow, so I would love to just constantly sue everyone. Even Eric. I threatened to sue Eric one time.
We'll get into that.
I know when requests get denied, sometimes it's not just specifically for like a subject matter kind of exception, but sometimes they say that it's unduly burdensome or that they simply just can't find the record.
Yeah.
In the course of your lawsuits, how often have you gone to, where your lawyer has gone to depose the clerks or custodians to ask about their process?
Never. No, that's never happened. That would be awesome. They have, what's really great about some of these lawsuits is that those that are in charge of, the head of the FOIA office at these various agencies, they will submit declarations, talking about the search, talking about the documents, and oftentimes these declarations will be very valuable and newsworthy, particularly CIA, NSA. Recently the NSA FOIA chief submitted a declaration revealing that there were 3 other emails that Edward Snowden sent, that may have, kind of met that sort of, not necessarily met the definition of concerns, but that he sent to the office that he sent them to. So that was valuable information. But never got the chance to, to depose, anyone to, sort of get any information out of them. But the unduly burdensome part is used a lot, and I know the State Department loves saying that. And there's actually a response that you can give when they say that. Especially, the requirement is for you to basically describe the records you're seeking. Sometimes they'll say, well, it's unduly burdensome because we have 20,000 pages. Great, give me all 20,000 pages.
Getting back to some of the nuts and bolts, thank you both for being here. Not everyone in this room has a lawyer or a 14-page template that they're working from. What are strategies for people to use to actually get their FOIA responded to and potentially successfully?
Sure.
Given the clock, and then also if you guys can talk about your fight, we'd appreciate that too.
Which one do you want first?
Dealer's choice.
Okay, so...
You talk about FOIA strategies.
Okay.
So I was like,
so, the way I learned about FOIA so early on, besides being around, hanging around the FOIA crowd, was actually you can ask for these various government agencies for the administrative case files, on certain FOIAs. And that basically would provide you with my templates, or anyone else's. There's a lot of the letters and requests online, and it really is beneficial. You can find that if you type in the ACLU and other people. You can find it that way.
I was just going to say, years ago, I remember, I don't know, probably something better exists now. There was something called the FOIA generator.
Yeah, and Muckrock is out there.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Muckrock.
Yeah,
you can use that. It's sort of helpful, very helpful in terms of creating that sort of template, if you will. And the FOIA generator, I think, is Reporters Committee.
Yeah,
I think so.
Right,
That's still there as well. So there's a lot of those sort of those useful sort of go-betweens, if you will, that will help sort of put that together. But really, I think that sometimes reading other people's requests is truly important. So just reading the language, what they're asking for. It's when you say like, how can you get it? How can your request, or how can you file a good request and get documents quickly? It's also really important that you read the law. Understand the FOIA, right? We're journalists, and so that's part of it in terms of citizen journalists, we're all journalists, but it's important to really know what the law says, and each government agency, at least on the federal level, has at the bottom of their page or somewhere there a link to the FOIA, right? Read it, read what the regulations are. So really absorbing that information only will benefit you when it comes to filing that. When you are filing a request, make sure you use the right language. Sometimes, to getting to his question about unduly burdensome, I want every document that mentions UFOs. Well, there's probably millions of pages. Yes, that would be, burdensome. Try to narrow that down to UFOs and New Mexico on Thursday, whatever day, So, and reading other people's, requests. All agencies, for the most part, at least again on the federal level, and the state level is very different, by the way, because each state has their own law on how you deal with that. But on the federal level, there's FOIA logs. You can go through the FOIA logs where they literally log all of the FOIA requests that come in. And yes, it sounds boring, but this is these days, this is my fun. It's like, oh man, new FOIA logs out. Oh, going through it. So, just really kind of absorbing all that info is very important. Just, identifying exactly what you want. That actually helps the FOIA analyst. So that's just like the best place. On the state level is just so different. And I do file requests on the state level. But where it differs is that the states are also very secretive, but they will try to deter you from getting any documents by slapping you with insane fees, crazy fees. So this response time is much quicker. But they'll say, oh, you want these documents? Give us $5,000.
We recently had an experience like that and fought it, and it turned into either $21 or $14 for multiple thousands of dollars. So,
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, with Ferguson, I filed some requests for documents in Ferguson, and they were like testing, like, oh yeah, this will cost you $2,500 or $2,000, and we wanted it quickly, and there was the fight part of it. Weren't willing to really get into the fight, but we said, okay, we'll pay it. They gave me 8 emails. I think what does that come out to? $400 an email. I don't know. My math is off, but it was a lot of money. So, it's really, the best advice I can give you is just read up as much as you can about the law, especially the laws in all various states, and know that what you can ask for.
All right, we will get to the fight, but there are more questions.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
sure. Throw the mic just like this.
So as a journalism student here at Rutgers, I know that every class I've taken, they emphasize timeliness. And of course, as a journalist, that's like a big key part of being a journalist. So how do you use FOIA? You make it sound like it takes so long, so how do you make your articles current? And how do you, I just don't understand the strategy of like filing for something that you want to know now to make
I backdate all my articles. Yes, it's a very lengthy, tedious process. And, I try to file, I'm filing many FOIAs per week. And largely because, there's many different reasons, but because on the national security side, it's difficult to get information. And I enjoy doing this. I enjoy trying to, force this, the release of these records. And so by doing it as often as I do, it ultimately will hopefully create a pipeline where then months down the road, I'll start getting a regular flow of records. If you are dealing with a story that's breaking, yes, don't expect that any it is an investment in time. And, you know, for me, I try to, you know, like with this, you know, with these documents that I've received on the U.S. citizen killed in the drone strike, I try to make these, you know, these stories to bring it out to show why it's still important, even though time has passed. There are many times, however, you know, many instances where it's like, this is old, I can't do anything with it now. I was just talking about that today about BP, you know, related to the disaster in the Gulf, where I got some documents. But, you know, I think that kind of the burden is almost on the journalist to show, like, why it should still matter now, you know. I feel truly passionate about that. I mean, I try to make use of everything that, you know, that I get, even if it's, you know, too old. Because ultimately, I believe that the documents, you know, the records belong to the people, to the public. So maybe I'll throw it up on document cloud, you know, or, you know, just to share it. But I try to make a story out of it.
Actually, just to, Document Cloud is a resource for journalists where primary sources are posted, and obviously you use it. I was involved in the...
You founded it! You're the founder!
Yes, I disclosed the conflict of interest. But the useful thing for folks to know is that, you know, in terms of understanding FOIA is the kinds of documents you can get. I mean, I would imagine some plurality, if not majority, of those documents are from FOIAs that are on there. So it's just a useful place to look for the kinds of things you can get. I'm sure there are FOIAs there themselves. The other thing I would say in response to your question about timeliness, I mean, ProPublica is sort of the anti-timely publication. And, you know, the reason why is that there are certain stories you can tell immediately, and then there are kinds of stories where you're creating the story.
Right.
Right? And that's what we specialize in. I think in large degree that's what you specialize in. And, you know, those are things, there are obviously some things that are going to come out that just aren't relevant. But lots of things people just care about. You know, if you're writing about the drone strike, the justification for killing a U.S. citizen for a drone strike, well, you know what? That was a few years ago. Killing a U.S. citizen with a missile is a hell of a thing. And, you know, people care about that.
Yeah, I think they still care about it later on. I mean, really, it's just, yes, and I think that the, you know, the time factor is, you know, you can plan. I mean, I really do try to plan ahead, you know. I'm not going to give away, like, what's going to expire next year, but I filed something, you know, that I know is going to, you know, expire next year, that will hopefully by, you know, filing it now, will get me the documents then. So it's trying to look ahead. That was the whole reason I filed those, you know, the request for Hillary Clinton's emails, because I knew she would be the, you know, front runner. And I want to see what, you know, what these records would show. If there was no, by the way, nothing partisan about it. It was simply like, you know, these are important documents.
So what do you do when you get 20,000 pages of, I don't even know.
I throw a party. I mean,
Well,
if I get 20,000 pages.
How do you make sense of all that information, especially when, let's say something's created digitally, and you buy a request and maybe they turn it into a dead tree, they give it to you, you turn it back into something digital, how do you, and it's very difficult to search, you know, PDF, I mean, so part of the impediments that get put in your path, right, are that you have to process all this information.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that, any tools that you use or tools you wish existed that would help you do that?
Yes, more people. That's one thing I wish existed more. I mean, it is difficult. I mean, I'm working on something now related to Guantanamo that I've discussed with, you know, with Eric and Scott. And it's a labor-intensive investment, you know, it's just labor-intensive to sort of digest these documents that are very, very valuable, and to sort of, you know, figure out what the story will ultimately be. You know, when I receive, you know, there are times when I receive, you know, a couple thousand pages of documents. And, you know, I try to sit with it for a while. I mean, I'll read it once, I'll read it again. I essentially, you know, make notes about page 22. This is what I did with the latest story on Samir Khan, the U.S. citizen killed in a drone strike. Weren't that many pages, but, you know, I read the documents and I went through it again. Page 22, bought an Acer notebook, you know. And from there, I see, you know, what my sort of notes look like. And then I get an idea of what the narrative will look like based on that. But, I mean, it's you know, when you're getting that large volume, if that's what you're referring to, a big volume of records. I mean, it's just a matter of investing, you know, the time. And this was one of the challenges. I mean, honestly, with these CIA records I received, there was such an overwhelming number of records related to their spying on the Senate, an overwhelming number of records that just was like, whoa, this is a lot, and became somewhat technical. How do I understand? You know, how do I turn this into plain English? That was actually a big challenge, and it actually required me sharing those records with a number of different people who were experts who could explain it in plain English, because it was difficult. And not until, like I said, it wasn't until the CIA called and said, hey, you know, don't post that I was like, oh, now I know what my story's going to be. But, you know, so I do that often. I do share records that I will receive with, you know, with some experts or people who have, you know, that expertise to analyze it and help, you know, help explain it. I hope that answers the question.
I happily follow you guys like on Vice News, on Twitter, your documentaries, all that. And I think either you or one of your colleagues actually visited Seton Hall Law School about the issue of Guantanamo Bay. You guys spoke to a former detainee. So on the political, looking at it from the political perspective, is there any documents or any leverage that you guys can use to, I would say, leak information regarding two countries' communications about a detainee, or is it just strictly domestic issues about anything really, where you could intervene and ask about two countries' foreign affairs? Is that limited, or?
What do you mean? I'm not quite sure I follow the question.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is that, can you guys process and use your resources to explore issues internationally between two countries, or is it basically just strictly domestic issues?
Oh no, definitely between two countries. In fact, on that specific story, that was my colleague. I assisted with it, but that was my colleague who did that documentary you're referring to. And on that, I actually have a lawsuit with the State Department where I am, you know, trying to gain, you know, insight into what are the discussions that take place between the U.S. and other governments with regard to detainees specifically, when detainees are being released to these other countries. So if you're asking like whether, you know, FOIA, you know, or correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, other countries do have, you know, freedom of information laws. So, I mean, it was actually interesting. Yemen, actually, before Civil War broke out, they passed a very robust freedom of information law. And I was really hoping to, you know, file a request with Yemen, but that's never going to happen now. But, you know, so yes, you can, you know, you can explore that.
Would there be like a conflict of interest between, let's say, the FOIA laws of the United States and another country, hypothetically, or?
No, I mean, if that country allows you, in the U.S., anyone around the world can file a request. If the other countries allow, you know, a U.S. citizen or someone in the U.S. to use it, sure, go for it. In fact, that's really like, you know, the global FOIA is what I aspire to one day. So.
Hi. So my question is about how citizens and advocates can use FOIA. Obviously, we understand the role that FOIA plays in journalism, but how can environmental advocates, advocates for criminal justice reform, or just citizens, you know, average Joe or Jane living on Main Street, how can they use FOIA in your mind to sort of make a positive change or find out information?
Sure. I mean, really, it's the same. Eric may have a different opinion or agree, but it's really the same way that journalists do. I feel that, on one thing that we benefit from as journalists is that we are entitled to a fee waiver. Okay, we are not asking for records for any, for commercial reasons, selling information or what have you. But we are actually providing a public service, and so we demonstrate that to these government agencies when we request these records. That these records are going to be used for a story or a book or a film, and I should be entitled to a waiver of fees because it will benefit everyone. And by the way, that is also why I feel, that it's important to disclose records when you receive them. But I think that citizens, advocates, activists can use it much in the same way. It would be beneficial if you could explain to an agency so you can get perhaps a waiver of fees somehow, how you would, what you intend to do with those records. You intend to post those records, write a story about it, maybe work alongside ProPublica, and ensure that they're for public consumption. You could certainly, in the Occupy Wall Street days, you could certainly, just as an example, file a request with FBI and Department of Homeland Security about Occupy Wall Street, and these were, people filed documents to see what roles the federal agencies played, in dismantling the movement. My friend, someone who I've worked on FOIA lawsuits with, his name is Ryan Shapiro. He is also an animal rights activist. He's aggressively used FOIA to, pry loose information about, on a wide range of issues, but on, animal rights issues, share those documents with, various publications. So really it's ensuring that what you're asking for will ultimately, benefit the public somehow.
Yeah, I would just add briefly, Jason and I were talking about beforehand, that lots of advocacy organizations have in fact been quite aggressive with FOIA. ACLU has jumped out ahead of news organizations. And the other thing, and I've heard this stat long ago, and I don't know if it's still relevant, but that the majority of FOIAs are not filed by news organizations.
No.
In fact, by corporations.
That's right.
So, this is not something that is limited to, you're wearing your fedora and have a reporter badge.
And it's really, this is, by the way, just to sort of segue this for a moment, why I believe like FOIA logs are really important, particularly with some agencies, because when a corporation is asking for documents, it's not like they're putting out a press release, they're asking for something. And so, when you see Philip Morris asking for documents, it's like, oh, what are they asking for? And then you can just say, I want everything you give to Philip Morris.
Which is by a trick you can use with FOIA. If you see somebody in the log, you say, I want everything Cy Hirsch, just ask for.
Right. You can totally do that. I mean, generally I think that with journalists there is an understanding that you shouldn't do that. But you can. In fact, it's funny because there was a reporter from the Associated Press who asked for a bunch of documents, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But and he asked for like a year ago, and nothing ever came out. So I sent him a note. I said, hey, did you write anything on that? Do you mind if I ask for the same thing? And he's like, no, go for it. I'm not going to do anything. So he sent it to me, or I filed the request. They sent me these documents. I'm like, I can't believe they didn't do anything on this. I'm going to write a story. And turned out it was a story about Keith Alexander, former head of the NSA, and his communications with Google, which was amazing. And then he was like, oh man, I missed that in the documents I got. So, so sometimes it's, it is beneficial just to look through it.
Whatever became of that program I read about earlier this summer where federal agencies said they were going to start posting FOIA responses before, like publicly before giving them to you or at the same time?
Right.
And how would you have felt as a journalist about getting a scoop and filing a request and then just posting it up for everybody to see?
I was pretty vocal about that. That's a great question. So various government agencies, again, this is so crazy because FOIA really is broken. It's powerful. It can be used, you can sort of make good use of it, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And one of the things that these government agencies decided to do instead of literally fixing the law was to come up with this program called Release to All. So a release to one person, okay, would essentially be released to everyone. And so there were a number of different agencies that were involved with this pilot project. And it was the EPA, Office of Director of National Intelligence, I think some agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, some the DoD offices, and maybe the Department of Justice. And when it first, basically what it meant is when they release to me, they'll release it to everyone. And, as I just mentioned, I sue for a lot of these documents. So there's an investment of time, money, and when I get the documents, there's an important sort of moments where you have to, or an important time investment to, digest what these documents are about. So I was not happy because that meant that, yes, I'm a journalist, guilty. I would lose out on perhaps a scoop, if everyone else, got these documents too. And that's certainly the case right now with Hillary Clinton. I mean, I'm happy that, everyone's getting those emails, but it really was, my lawsuit that forced everyone else to sort of, be able to get that. So I wasn't happy about this, and I was pretty vocal about it, and people were mad at me because they were like, you're not for the people, and I'm like, come on, give me a week, at least give me a week with the documents. How is that going to hurt me? Anyway, so what happened is that the program's still ongoing, but what it requires is that it's not as if these agencies are making a big sort of public statement. We just released a document to Jason Leopold. Everyone, head over here. So they're not doing that. So it requires the agencies do still release it, but it requires a person to literally every day check the page to see if they've released it to everyone. So as an example, the EPA released some records to me several months ago. And they also sent me an email. This was kind of weird. And it was in all caps. Notification was the subject line. This is a release to all. That's what it said. And I was like, oh my God, it's weird. But nobody even was aware that it was released to everyone. So, I would certainly be very worried if I didn't have this opportunity to sort of, analyze CIA documents if it were released to everyone. But right now, essentially the program exists. There have been releases. But in order to know that those releases exist, it requires a regular visitation of of these pages that are there. You would have to literally say, I want to see if they posted anything today, in order to get that.
So, sure, whoever has the mic back.
Hi there. I'm Charlie Craddock. I'm a journalist here in New Brunswick. Thank you both for coming and talking. The thing I noticed is that increasingly the records that folks are seeking are new types of digital things. So, for instance, emails. I lucked out and was able to get several years worth of the city council's emails a couple of years ago. But now that same request, they won't give it to me. That's through Oprah, not FOIA. But nevertheless, that's just the city of New Brunswick being the city of New Brunswick. But there's also videos, from police incidents, or how do you deal with the concept of not knowing what records exist, or dealing with very voluminous requests that you might need to request hours and hours of video or days and days of video, and not knowing what's exempted and what's not, and do you end up forcing the government to then have to review all those documents to decide what they're allowed to give you, and how do you cope? How do you deal with those types of sort of new digital things?
Sure. Well, first of all, the government does review everything before they release it. So on the federal level, and even on the state level, local level, that they are, in fact, the reason why the fees are so high at the local level when they ask you to pay for it is because they're paying their attorneys to basically redact it. So that's where, the money is going for that and searching. So all the government agencies they do conduct a review of the records, determine what can be released, and then turn it over. I always request emails. Emails, whenever I'm requesting records, it's, emails are always in there. But I rarely go on fishing expeditions, and so it sounds a little bit like what you're asking, or what you're referring to, was a fishing expedition, like you don't know what exists. So I don't, I won't say, give me all your videos one day of just something. I have talked about that often, like just having conversations like, oh, I wonder if I just, file a request and just say, give me whatever you have. But then they'll come back and say, it's, we have, voluminous material and you have to narrow it down. So, I don't often, do that. I try to target, I try to, identify what I'm looking for. And, that's probably really important. For example, in Chicago, what's really interesting, and I was mentioning this earlier about the police shooting of Lachlan McDonald, is that the video was ultimately released on that, right? And all of these journalists, news organizations, filed requests for that video. But only one person sued for it, and he was an independent journalist and has no backing from any news organization. But he decided to go to the next level and seek out a lawyer who I believe took it on pro bono, and they forced the release of that. And so it was just kind of amazing to me that, I know it's getting a little away from your question, but it was just amazing that, it took an independent journalist to do that. I think people are really, really fearful of lawsuits. There are some labs that exist that, at Yale, for example, that will actually help file, I believe it's Yale, that will help file a lawsuit. They have to pick and choose. But, anyway, to get back to your question, I think I never really try to go on fishing expeditions. It's not, terribly helpful. I do try to identify, or at least target what my request is.
Except Hillary Clinton's emails, right?
Oh, well, okay, yes. So Hillary Clinton, I said, give me every email that Hillary Clinton ever got. Yes, I did ask for that. And they did say, well, eventually you have to narrow it down. But thank God I asked for like every single one, because it forced them to release all of her emails. So, but yeah, I think that videos are things that are not often requested, at least on the federal level. And the FBI is a great example. They have a lot of video, and audio that you could ask for on, a number of different, anything really, even going back years and years, but on police, law enforcement issues. Training videos are fantastic. By the way, seriously, if you want to get amazing video, ask your local police department for all this training videos. I mean, it's not to be believed. And the music that goes along with the training videos, wow. I mean, the story writes itself right there.
So do folks want to hear about our fight? I feel like we should finally say it. This is actually, in some sense, how you became the FOIA terrorist. So in 2006, folks might have remembered there was a story in which Jason wrote a story saying Karl Rove had been indicted.
Let's make sure everyone knows who Karl Rove is.
Right.
Everyone knows who Karl Rove is?
Very good editor. Right, Karl Rove, the former consigliere to President Bush, saying he'd been indicted. What's that?
Bush's brain, right?
Right. Or what did he call him? What was his nickname for him? Like some turd.
Like turd blossom.
Turd blossom.
Turd blossom. Yeah.
Anyway, that he was going to be indicted with a connection with the Valerie plane, because this is all like incredibly dated stuff.
No. Are you talking about my story?
I'm talking about your story.
Yeah. No, I said that not he was going to be indicted.
He had been indicted.
He was
even more wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I, at erichumansky.com, I was then working for Slate, and I, had a blog like everybody had in the early aughts. And I said something like, people shouldn't trust Jason Leopold because he has a dodgy history, or some such.
I think you're being a little kind. I think your words were a little.
Okay, well, what I said was.
You wrote it down.
I did. Well, I called him a fabulist, at which point you objected, and I corrected myself and said, I stand corrected, you are a plagiarist.
Yes.
And you had some runnings and some stuff. We talked about it earlier. I withdraw my previous accusation of that, but nevertheless, you had some problems with, you had articles that were withdrawn and so forth.
I have and by the way, when it comes to transparency, I'm really transparent. So there is, I've been very transparent about myself. It's all out there.
So in fact, Jason had, and it's been written about in stories, you had stories withdrawn. There was these questions about whether things were lifted, although, right? And in any case, so I wrote this stuff, you wrote me back, and I believe, I actually looked at this old blog post, called me, let me see here, lazy, self-righteous, and then you threatened to sue me. At which point, I said, I corrected myself and corrected myself to say, in fact, you're a plagiarist. And we left it there, I think, for a number of years, until you started doing actually very good stories.
Well, thank you. This was like, I was pissed, and I remember reading this, and I'm like, mother, and just like, this was, to just give you some background on it, this was a really, this is a good segue, because this really sort of helps, will help you understand why I do the type of work I do now. One, I really love journalism, okay? I'm very, very passionate about journalism. I love, the job that I have, and I love having this opportunity. I was working for a news organization where I was publishing stories on Valerie Plainly. And it was a nonprofit. It was
that Valerie Plainly, for those who don't know, by the way, was a CIA agent who, in this incredibly circuitous way, had been outed effectively by the Bush administration, by, it turns out, the chief of staff to the vice president, Scooter Libby, had been outed as a CIA agent, seemingly in response to her husband raising questions about the Bush administration's claims of weapons of mass destruction. Phew. So that's the details.
I mean, it really does feel like dated history, but nevertheless, obviously, very important to look at ISIS now.
Right.
So I had been covering this for a number of years, and covering it for a news organization that was not really, one that many people heard of.
Truthout.org.
Truthout.org, yes. And I cultivated sources. My background prior to that was, I worked at the Dow Jones Newswires, LA Times, so I knew how this game was played in journalism. And I cultivated sources, and I felt I did some, some good work on this. And in fact, Valerie Plain, later on, said as much. Not that it really, anything, but so I was doing this for a number of years, and there was obviously lots of competition, and I was fiercely competitive, and also eager to make a name for myself in hopes that I could sort of go to another level. And I remember this because it was a Saturday. I was in the car with my wife. We were driving to a dealership to drop off a car, and I got a phone call from a source. And the source told me that Karl Rove had been indicted. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I got this information of you, and I pulled the car over, and I started taking down this information. And it was quite detailed. It wasn't just like, hey, this happened. It happened last night. Patrick Fitzgerald at the time was a special prosecutor, and he had 24 business hours to get his affairs in order. And so he gave me this information. And I followed it up with another source. And all I could think about at this moment was, literally, I had this scoop, mentality where it was only thinking about the scoop and never once thinking, is there a possibility that this may not be true? Because I trusted my sources, right? I think that when you develop this source, reporters develop a relationship with their sources, it's built on trust. And so, but they're also, as I learned the hard way, it should come with quite a bit of sometimes skepticism. But I believe this to be true. And I actually talked about this to some of my colleagues at Vice. I was also invested in this story in some way. And what I mean by that is that I felt passionate that there was an injustice that took place here, the outing of this CIA operative. This was a terrible injustice that, as a way to sort of, conceal the lies that led, ultimately, somehow the Iraq War played into it. But I felt very passionate about that. And so I did not question my sources. I told my editor, we've got a massive scoop on our hands. And really the only thing I could think of is, wow, I wonder how long before the New York Times and the Washington Post, pick up the story.
Did you try to call Karl Rove?
I did not try to call Karl Rove, but I did call his attorney. And I also called the spokesperson for the special prosecutor, but it was a Saturday, okay? And of course, I look back on it now like, what the F was I thinking? Because it was a Saturday, that it's not, I'm sure they're not looking to...
Karl Rove doesn't roll on Shabbos.
But yeah, I mean, I just think that it was like, it was, I didn't feel like it was, at the time for me this was urgent, I had to get this out. So I made the phone call, nobody responded. I had my editor speak to some sources. But this was really, just driven by the fact that this was true and I needed to report it. And I did, and I reported it just like that. And I had been in journalism for quite some time, so it wasn't new to the game. This wasn't, me being naive in a way with my sources, just completely trusting them it was. But I reported it straight out. Karl Rove was indicted here this time, happened then. Here's some color details. I mean, it was filled out. There was not one caveat in the story, not a single caveat in the story. And all I could think of was, like I said, it was how long before other folks picked this up, other media organizations.
Turned out forever.
Right. You had a great sort of response. This was an exclusive.
I said it was the realm of the permanent exclusive.
It was a permanent exclusive.
Where you never want to be.
Yes, and it obviously, as we all know, Karl Rove was never indicted. But this was a huge, huge, huge fiasco. One that cost me my credibility entirely. I mean, it destroyed my credibility and led to articles and posts like Eric's, which, at the time, I mean, I was really upset by it, and I never really imagined that there would be that much, blowback, backlash, and sort of, hitting me on that. But it was pretty fierce. So it took a toll, and it was, it was probably the worst experience I ever had as a journalist. But it also was, it was an opportunity. And for me, I mean, I could have, it could have either led to the end of my career, or honestly, I could have figured out, like, what do I do next? And that's what sort of helped lead me to doing what I'm doing now. I mean, this was, to just put a time frame on it, this was 9 years ago. We'll be celebrating the 10th anniversary next June of my, faux pas. But it was a terrible mistake and a very, very hard lesson that, I had to start from scratch. Because it did, when your credibility is shot, nobody is willing, who's going to trust you. And so I started over. was also another lesson. I just felt that I don't want to use none of the sources ever again. And it's really interesting because it was years later, I started continuing doing the work I was doing on Guantanamo, and but it was years later, a couple of years later, 3 years later, and I remember it because it was through a sort of a friend, somebody had passed me some documents, and these were documents that this person received under the Freedom of Information Act. These were extraordinary documents. They were a PowerPoint presentation. It was a PowerPoint presentation given to nuclear missile officers. These are the people who are in charge of literally turning the key if they're going to launch nuclear weapons. What these documents show, this PowerPoint, this was about the ethics and morals of launching nuclear weapons. In this presentation, it showed that Jesus Christ literally would support launching nuclear weapons. And they had pictures of Jesus on a horse. And they also, they had a...
I want you to send that afterward.
Yeah, it's called, the headline of the story is Jesus Loves Nukes. And then they had something on Werner von Braun, who was the father of modern-day space program, but also a former SS Nazi, as the sort of holding him up as the person for being moral and ethical. So I put the story out, I published the story, and I attached these documents. And it was remarkable to see the response because the story went viral. And this had been an ethics program that had been in place for 20 years. After the story came out, and literally this was all over the place, the Air Force, they ended this program. They ended this training. So to talk about impact, right, they immediately ended it. And it was at that moment where I was like, I need to do more of this. I need to do more of this type of work where the documents become the primary source material. One, it allowed me to continue doing the work. Two, it could be a good path for me to help restore my credibility. Because this was a really bad mistake. And then, looking back, at the time, it was terrible. Because journalism is really something I care about, and I made, terrible mistake in writing that story. But it was, also an opportunity to become a better journalist. And really, that terrible mistake allowed me to become a better journalist. The one that I am today, which I'm, very proud of the journalist that, that I am. But I worked very hard. So that was a, that was that opportunity. That was that moment. And it was FOIA. And I had this friend of mine, I said, where did you get this? He said, oh, I filed a FOIA request. I'm like, teach me everything you know. And that was the, that was the path. That's the emotional part of our talk. So
now we're gonna hug.
Yeah, we're all gonna hug. But yes, that's part of my story. You have as journalists, you have ups and downs. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, but Karl Rove ended up writing about me in his book, and he called me a nut with internet access. And I can look back on that now and kind of laugh about it, but at the time I was not laughing.
So thank you guys very much for coming out. I think
we're gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, this was great.